Hello, this is Alan Hess, author of Googie Modern, Architectural Drawings of R.M.A. Davis and Newlove, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. No place in the world celebrates modernism better than Palm Springs, California, during Modernism Week, every February, a week that actually lasts 11 days, an architecture and design festival. And U.S. Modernist Radio is there, interviewing keynote speakers plus special guests at the U.S. Modernist compound inside the amazing retro Hotel Skylark. If you're in the mid-century modern, Modernism Week is a joyous festival of plentiful martinis, architectural documentary premieres, detailed art and architecture exhibits, and so much more. Today's theme is places, and we will explore a few. Southridge in Palm Springs with Susan Secoy Jensen, Marfa, Texas with Upe Peter Flueckiger, and the Rocky Mountains with John Gendall. After that, we welcome back Laura Windley and her Mint Julep Jazz Band. During Modernism Week, we don't just hang around Palm Springs. We sometimes charter a bus and head to Rancho Mirage. That's the home of Sunnylands, a 200-acre estate designed by A. Quincy Jones back in the mid-'60s for Walter Annenberg. He had some pretty famous guests drop by: Queen Elizabeth, Bob Hope, Fred Astaire, and about 8 U.S. presidents, going all the way back to Eisenhower. Oh, and Frank Sinatra got married at Sunnylands. Sunnylands Center is impressive enough, but there's also gardens, a 9-hole golf course, and an amazing art collection. So many presidents have been to Sunnylands, in fact, that its nickname is the Camp David of the West. And now, here's the guy whose own home in Durham, North Carolina may someday be a tourist destination, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thank you, Tom. You know, one of the great reasons to go out to Palm Springs in February is the weather, which is normally gorgeous. Mm-hmm. Highs in the mid-70s during the day, just perfect. Lows maybe in the low 60s at night. Cool breezes, just beautiful heat and cool, all mixing together like this symphony. And of course, you've got the mountains, very majestic, that you can look up at, and you've got the desert. But
I know where he's going with this.
Not so much this year.
Yeah.
This year, it was cold and wet. You may remember there was an Arctic blast going on in mid-February of 2023, and this certainly affected the Palm Springs area. The snow was coming down on the mountains near us, and you could see cloud formations and snow come down as low as it had ever been. We're not going to hold that against Palm Springs because it's normally lovely, and we can't wait to go back for next year. One of the fun places that I love to visit each time I go to Palm Springs is the Purple Room, which is really one of the last of the supper clubs in Palm Springs. You go in, you have dinner, it's a relatively small restaurant, and you have live jazz performances up on the stage, a mere 10 feet from you. It's really fantastic and harkens back to the days where supper clubs were famous and prevalent all over the country. If this sounds like a blast, and trust me, going out to Palm Springs really is, come stay with U.S. Modernist in 2024 when we go to Modernism Week. Just drop your bags and we'll fill your days with tours and talks and your nights with dinners and parties. Email me for more information at george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Today's theme is places and buildings you may not know. We'll explore Southridge in Palm Springs, Marfa in Texas, and one place you may know, the Rocky Mountains, with 3 distinguished Modernism Week speakers. Later, it's jazz vocalist Laura Windley and the Mint Julep Jazz Band. First up, architect Susan Secoy Jensen. She took her architectural degree from UCLA and used it to establish Secoy Architects. Secoy opened in 1996 with a focus on mid-century design and adaptive reuse. When she's not restoring Eichler homes or working in Orange, California, Susan spends time in Palm Springs at her restored modernist home in the gated hillside Southridge community. She's in good company. A lot of famous houses like the Elrod and Bob Hope and Steve McQueen houses are in Southridge. Susan is on the Southridge HOA and serves on the Board of Advisors for the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. Here's George's conversation with Susan Secoy Jensen.
Susan, I understand you're a little bit like Tom Cruise. You do motorcycles, you fly planes, you've played football. I mean, wow.
Well, that's quite a compliment. However, I'm a little more humble, perhaps, than Tom, and I don't do them on a daily basis. I can tell you that. Architecture usually takes most of my time. And so, and my motorcycle license has to do with a Vespa, okay?
Oh, okay. Well, that still counts, right?
It does. It's freeway legal, and you have to have an M1 license. And so I've got that at my building there in Orange. And when I was a student studying architecture in Florence, Italy, back in 1985, I saw those Vespas, and I said, I'm going to have one of those someday. And it took, a good 20 years to get it, but I enjoy it.
The Vespa is one of those mid-century symbols of Europe. I mean, all those movies had men and women scooting around Rome or Florence on their Vespas. Very romantic, the violins in the background.
Absolutely. And as students, there were a few of us that would take it out along Sorrento and along the coast there. And it was a dream come true from someone that grew up in Strongsville, Ohio.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not many Vespas in Strongsville?
No, especially this time of year.
And you don't have to have helmets, do you, in Italy?
Oh, no, especially in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there were no helmets at all, so it was very glamorous.
Yeah,
glamorous.
Your hair could be flowing behind you.
Absolutely.
And some handsome person named Carlo would be...
or Paulo or whoever, yes. It was, like I said, a dream come true. Now I suit up, I have the helmet on, the whole thing, but my building is in Old Town Orange, and it's a great place to just kind of scooter around.
Oh, that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
So how long have you had your practice there?
Since 1996.
Okay.
I was licensed in 91.
And you've done a presentation here at Modernism Week on Southridge, which is an area of Palm Springs.
Yes.
Kind of up on the hillside a little bit.
Yes. Southridge is a beautiful hillside community that was built in the early 60s, developed late 50s, and it could not be built in that area today because of different code restrictions.
There are ridge laws, right, around the area?
Correct.
You can't build anything up into the mountains.
That's correct. And so this is a very unique hillside community, very special.
Are there still lots up there that have never been built on?
There are. There are several vacant lots, but what has become customary is for several of the owners to buy some of the lots that may eventually impact their views.
Okay.
And so it's a smart way to go about view protection.
Yeah. And these are pretty expensive lots today, right? I mean, back then it wasn't so,
But even then, it was advertised as a very elitist community behind the gates. And
so it's gated?
It's gated.
Okay.
And they would present these advertisements that actually named names of the prestigious property owners, whereas today I don't think that would be overly acceptable.
Okay. So who were some of the big names at the time?
At the time, David Jansen.
Okay.
And Bob Hope, of course.
Yeah.
He was one of the later ones to come on the hill. Arthur Elrod.
Right.
He had a place
designer.
there. Steve McQueen. William Holden.
Mm-hmm.
So it had a very prestigious register.
Jansen, I read, built this wild house and never got to live there.
He died.
He died,
Yes.
Fairly young.
He did. And then it was purchased by the Johnson family of Jet and Ebony magazine out of Chicago.
Uh-huh.
So they had quite a legacy there as well. They owned 2 homes.
Okay.
So that was the first, and then they had a second one built.
In doing the research for your book, how did you gain access to these houses, or did you?
Well, We live there.
Okay.
So I do have pretty good relationships with several of the neighbors.
You go borrow some sugar from somebody?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Usually that's in the form of a text.
Yeah.
And most people are not full-time residents there,
Okay.
including ourselves. So we try to get acquainted when able. And it's a really good group up there. It's gone through a lot of ups and downs as far as the dynamics, both financial and with the various personalities. But it's in a very good place right now.
I know for a while, I think the Hope House and Elrod House had some owners that were trying to make things go, and it just wouldn't go and wouldn't go.
That's right. And during the recession, everything just kind of bottomed out. Some people picked up 2-3 lots, 2-3 houses, tried to use them as rental properties. That's not what Southridge cares to do. It's meant to be more of a privately owned, with the emphasis placed upon privacy versus rental homes.
Right.
And so several of those homes went into foreclosure, and it wasn't pretty. They were being very neglected. The good news is, in the past decade, there's been a resurgence of interest in these properties. And the homeowners have one by one done beautiful restorations. So it's been a domino effect.
So who were some of the original architects that were building out there?
Hugh Capter,
Okay.
he was one of the first. There were 4 homes that were built in 1962 through 64. And Hugh Capter worked on the home that was built for one of the investors, Thomas Griffing. He designed the house, which is now known as the Steve McQueen House.
Okay.
It was built initially as a spec house, but it was snatched up immediately by Buddy Morris, the music composer. So he worked with Hugh and then was brought back to do some more. Basically, he enclosed a carport into maids' quarters and so continued to work on the design of the house. And then by 1969, it was purchased by Steve McQueen, and that's its identity to this day.
Yeah.
Hugh Capter also worked on the William Holden house, and that was done a little bit later. Arthur Elrod, of course, his house was done by John Lautner, and then Lautner ended up doing the Hope House several years later.
Right?
Yes,
There was a fire?
and then he kind of washed his hands of it.
Yeah, there was some
Yes.
problems with the Hopes.
Primarily Mrs. Hope,
Yeah.
Dolores. She had her own interior designer. Whereas the reason Lautner was excited to work on it was Arthur Elrod was involved.
Yeah.
Well, once again, another untimely death. And so Mrs. Hope brought in her own interior designer, and it was just absolutely wrong on so many levels and counterintuitive to the overall simplicity and organic design that Lautner had intended. She put floral wallpaper all around, mirrors everywhere, very traditional furnishings, even some stuffed animals here or there, things that just don't work in a
Sounds
Lautner.
like Laura Ashley came in.
Yes,
Right?
yes, right. And so hard to believe he had to run from that one. But the story has a happy ending. Today, Helena Arrejete, who worked with John Lautner and was a project manager back in the day, was brought in by the current homeowner to restore the house to its original design and beauty. And it is spectacular.
I bet. Yeah, I've interviewed Helena before.
Okay,
to
yes.
talk about this.
Yes,
She was really the uncredited hero of so many projects
that's correct.
that Lautner did,
Right.
especially Casa Mobrisa in Acapulco, I think it is.
That's correct.
Yeah,
yes.
is almost all her. Yeah.
And let's face it, it was a man's world, especially in the Southridge world back in the day. And so kudos to her. She's had a brilliant career.
And what about lately? Who are some of the architects that are doing the renovations out there around Southridge?
Well, the homeowners, such as myself, I worked on our own home.
Yeah.
And then our next door neighbor, who lives in the William Cody
Right.
home, is Michael Johnston.
Okay.
And he's a designer, so he managed his own project. Another home that was the first house built up there, the Max Stoffel house, has a Cody addition to it, which was done in 1969, I believe. She hired Mark Rios, and beautiful job. There have been very few new homes. There's one on the boards right now, and it's being designed by James Chiaffi.
Okay.
And it's currently under review, and he's doing a really diligent job of understanding the context and working with the neighbors as far as what will be acceptable there.
So how does this work? Is there a secret underground Southridge clubhouse where you do all these assessments of new projects?
Yeah, and I'm part of it.
Right. Of course.
There is an HOA.
Okay.
And there's like only one licensed architect on the hill. So guess who gets the job? Right? So, yeah, we do have an architectural committee.
Okay.
And that consists of residents there.
Like you.
Like me.
Yeah.
And there are others. It's behind the scenes, and yes, it's underground.
Okay, great.
Right.
You heard it here first, folks.
As a matter of fact, it's in the same room that was the original man cave
Oh,
with
okay.
Steve McQueen and his buddies, the neighbors.
Yeah.
They would all go down there, play cards, and smoke, and it happens to be in our house.
That's great.
So, yes, we do exist, and we do review things, and then, of course, it goes to the city.
In doing research, what surprised you about Southridge? What did you learn that was interesting?
Well, so many things. The original developers were three guys that came together, Rom, Petty, and Annabelle, and they were a contractor, tile setter, teacher. So it's not your typical sophisticated development company. They had this idea and this vision, and they, after a lot of headbutting, got the approval to build this road up the hill and then develop, I believe it was 22 lots initially, and then it continued on from there. But they built a couple of homes really as spec houses, but because of the advertising and the interest that came about so early on, these houses were snatched up. The first one was snatched up by Max Stoffel, who was a Swiss industrialist. His family traveled the world. He really enjoyed his trips to Egypt and then ended up in the United States and was drawn to the desert. And so at one point he went to Tucson in Arizona, and the vibe just wasn't for him, and Palm Springs worked. And so he was the first resident there.
Okay.
The second house was Thomas Griffing, and he and his wife Bernice bought the house, and this was 1962, and he was one of the original investors. As I mentioned earlier, he also purchased the property, which eventually became the Steve McQueen house.
Yeah.
But he lived there for many years. And then the next one was the Goldberg House, which was designed by William Cody. So we have three outstanding pieces of architecture right off the bat. And then Hugh Captor designed the fourth house. And so it really evolved rather quickly.
So what was the impact of Diamonds Are Forever on Southridge?
Well, everyone knows the modern Elrod house because of that movie. And
So if you haven't seen Diamonds Are Forever, it's a James Bond movie, early 60s, where Bond loses a fight to bikini-clad babes.
Thumper and Bambi.
Yeah,
Yes.
in the Elrod house.
That's right. That's right. And it is the ultimate cool layer. And, you know, as they say, have you ever noticed that the bad guys in movies always live in
Have
a
the best-
very
yes,
cool,
yes.
modern
Right.
piece of architecture? And the Elrod fit the bill for that. It's just an incredible home, you know, one of a kind. And with the retractable doors where you have the swimming pool where that scene took place, and the rocks where you can have quite a brawl there. It's a party house. It really is. And so it brought more acclaim to Southridge and to that house in particular.
Well, I imagine, lots of people were trying to make the pilgrimage to find the house
Right.
and couldn't get past the gate.
Right. And that still happens today.
Still?
Yes. There are a lot of people doing U-turns on the hill.
Okay.
If you have a helicopter, you can get a great view of it.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you have one in your underground lair we can borrow?
We do.
Excellent.
It's really quite an adventure up there.
Yeah.
I've yet to bring the Vespa, however.
Okay.
So it's really...
Oh, yeah. I could see you Vespaing up and down the hill in that.
The problem is getting back up the hill could be a challenge.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty steep.
It's rather steep.
Okay.
Yeah, and for my riding ability, it might be a little overwhelming.
Yeah, those Vespas didn't have a lot of torque, as I recall.
No, not really. No.
No. It's like the...
It's 150cc. It's,
Okay.
It's got a little
zip
kick
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the straightaway.
That's right. Flat. Yeah. Yes. I don't want to stop at the gate and roll back.
Mm-hmm.
That would not be fun. No.
What's the future for Southridge? What's going to be happening there over the next few years?
The future is extremely bright. More celebrities are purchasing and working on their homes currently. And so I would say there's at least 8 to 10 homes that have been recently renovated, and they're absolutely gorgeous. So the neighborhood has really turned around. Years ago, there was quite a bit of friction amongst the residents. That's really all settled down. It's a new generation. I think it has a lot to do with the appreciation of the architecture and the history there. We understand it. We get it. And it's a privilege to be there.
So the old guard didn't quite get it?
Not really, especially if they had been there through the 70s and 80s and started to have some feuds with each other.
Yeah.
There are some egos up there. So
Of course.
that plays into it. And I think where we're at now is people just enjoy the beauty of it, and everyone's lives are so busy that when we are there, the last thing we need is conflict or friction. It's about returning to a sanctuary. And that's just where we are today.
It's an escape place.
It's an escape place.
Yeah.
Yes. And one of my favorite things to do every morning is to walk the dog up the hill and to just take in those views and have extreme gratitude for being in this place. And Palm Springs is such a beautiful place. And as you mentioned early on, both my husband and I enjoy aviation, and we can see the airport very clearly from where we're at. And it just brings joy to see this sort of energy.
Now, I hear a rumor that there's some sort of hiking trail or platform or something where the public can kind of get near Southridge and view it.
Yes, it's the Araby Trail.
Okay.
And there is actually a gate from Southridge, a pedestrian gate, that we can do the loop, which is really, really nice. I have some neighbors that do that on a daily basis. Her response is, we don't need the gym. We have it right here.
Yeah.
And it's gorgeous. And it is a public trail. So it's very busy, especially the last couple of weeks with Modernism Week. I've seen so many people up there, and they get great views of Southridge.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So where would they access that?
It's right at Southridge Drive at the bottom. There's a parking lot there.
Okay.
And it's called the Araby Trail. And there's a sign that says Araby Trail. And so there's a condo complex that's right below the gates, the Southridge gates. It's called Rimcrest. And so the entry to the Araby Trail is very close to Rimcrest condominiums.
Okay.
So you can park right there in the parking lot and then cross over Southridge Drive.
Okay. And Vespa Association of America, if you want an in right here with Southridge, this is who to call.
I suppose that's right. Yes, we can make that happen.
Thank you so much for talking with me.
You're very welcome. Yeah.
That was George with architect Susan Secoy Jensen. Swiss-born architect, author, and photographer Upe Flueckiger is Dean and Professor in the College of Architecture at Texas Tech University. He is an expert on cultural meaning and construction systems of modular housing, which has led to experimental housing projects in both his personal and professional life. Upe is also the author of Donald Judd, Architecture in Marfa, Texas, a book that explores Judd's contributions to minimalist art and architecture and the community he started, Marfa, Texas. From the U.S. Modernist compound on a sunny morning by the pool, here's George's fun conversation with Upe Flueckiger.
Upe, you're Swiss, right?
I am.
And the patron saint of architecture here is Albert Frey, also Swiss.
That's very touching that you're bringing that up, because my first slide today will show Albert Frey and the Swiss connection. So, as being Swiss, also now Swiss American, but somebody once told me it's not really being a nation, it's like being part of a club. So any Swiss,
yes,
you find somewhere, you kind of have an automatic connection.
Right. It's like being from North Carolina, really.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or being a Raleigh native. I think there are 4 of us left.
All right.
Albert Frey has been so famous here because he really brought great custom design to the valley. He helped attract other architects to the area. And while Frey was not involved at the scale of some of these architects, he left behind a whole legacy of really meticulous buildings. What are some of the things that you've seen around here about Frey?
Well, I just stopped at the visiting center yesterday, and that was the greeting that transformed former gas station. I just really loved it. I am looking forward to see Frey House 2 tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful tour.
And I must say, the small you just mentioned is really engaging to me, because that has been a theme for my entire life. I sort of identify with that, and maybe there's a certain Swissness about it, because it's sometimes not the scale what makes the impact, it's the impact of the house.
Yes.
And Frey 1 and Frey 2 sort of show that. And I'm actually also excited. I saw at the time the Aluminaire. You saw that when I came. A little bit like Frey. I came first to New York City.
Yes.
And then traveled around. And then I saw the Luminaire in Long Island. And now I noticed it's here. So it's going to be a great project. And I hope it's going to be up there soon.
We hope so, too. We hear conflicting reports on how well that's going. But it's been stuck here for a while in planning limbo.
Well, it's a difficult, challenging task to preserve modern architecture, but you do a great job here at the city of Palm Springs, and I'm very happy to be here and part of your podcast.
Thank you. You are also an educator at Texas Tech?
Yes, very much so.
So what's going on in architecture these days? Because I'm seeing a lot of people online going, oh my God, AI is the end of architecture.
Well, we certainly need to know about it. I'm glad you're bringing it up. But as an educator, I think we went through all kinds of things like distance education. We thought the internet may be going to change that. Everything is going to be online. And I think education always happens among people. If you can inspire people, I think then you really have a leg up. And while this is challenging, there are also ways to work with the technology. So AI, I hope that would be another way of us to see and embrace the challenge in a new way, which we have to figure out right now.
The best, most rational comment that I've seen so far about this is that they're thinking that AI is going to end up acting like outsourcing. 15 years ago, people were up in arms because we were outsourcing detailing to India and Pakistan, and it was coming back, and people were worried that, the buildings were going to be insufficient, and they mostly turned out just fine. So maybe one day we'll be outsourcing to a bot somewhere who will do our bathroom detail and send it back.
Well, yes, and I actually was part of that when I worked in New York. So we sent out renderers to actually India, and then they came back, and it doesn't seem to be that big of a thing now. So here is maybe the hope for architecture, is because in the end it is a site-specific response. Mm-hmm. And I think Palm Springs shows that, as most good architecture always shows, that the context is done well. And with that, then basically it has to have an individual response still. And other than that, that's the difference between product design. This chair here can work in China, in Japan, in Africa. Here, it doesn't matter, but to react to a site climate and condition is always an individual approach. So I think we still have something to teach there.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But I could see a day where you would have an architectural firm of, 6, 12 people and a few bots, right, that they've purchased. And the bots do kind of the grunt work in the background.
Yes, that's definitely something we would say, maybe around the corner.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think we thought of many architecture, like we see now about architecture and robotics being around for close to 20 years.
Yeah.
Yet still a lot of architecture gets done quite conventional. So I think we always have to look out for the very new, but we also need to see how it's implemented.
Years ago, you built a house, I believe it was for $50.87 a square foot,
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And that was quite an achievement for 2006. So is that replicable today at, slightly higher cost? I mean, how do people who have a dream for something small and modern do it inexpensively?
Thank you for the question. I think that's exactly why I'm sometimes surprised why not more tap into it. Because in my mind, it's about imagination, arranging of space. So I do think, well, it might be not possible for that very same price, but with imagination, when we start sort of with the height of modernism, say the Eameses, case study houses, instead of doing size, but using imagination and being maybe also less interested in novelty, I think we could achieve quite great things. Because if I place this door here just at a perfect place, it frames a palm tree, it has a great outlook, it has cross ventilation, that window doesn't cost any more than if I place that window in a stupid place.
Yeah.
It's in the imagination. So instead of maybe sometimes going about novelty, to go with the Eameses of using an common material in an uncommon, innovative way, that gets you far. And if you look at that particular project, there is not that particular new things. They were corrugated iron the way Fry used, but it was in an imaginative way. And I would say that's timeless. And we can use that still today.
One of the questions that people ask me all the time is, George, this modern architecture thing is all great and everything, but why should I pay an architect all this money to do something I can go down the street to Lennar and they have something that's, really basic and everyone's buying it? And my answer is that an architect is trained in structure and scale and space, and you aren't. So odds are they can get you a house that'll do everything you want it to do in much fewer square feet than a developer can, because they're designing for everybody. And then that fewer square feet is going to more than make up for the fee that you're going to have to pay the architect to design the perfect house for you. And they go, really?
No, I think it's a brilliant thought the way we just had that. And I say it a little bit similar, but I use two analogies. I say, okay, I use the thing for the doctor, right? Something happens to you, you want to live long, you want to be healthy and all that. You don't seek out the veterinarian or say even the butcher just because they deal with meat. No, you go to make the best research you possibly can. Oh, which one is the best doctor? And I'm going to go there and get my treatment, right? And as somebody of my friends once said, it's like, well, bad architecture maybe doesn't kill you, but it kills you every day a little bit.
Yeah.
So good architecture can do the opposite for you. If you have arranged well placed the way you said it, it can actually make you healthier, and I firmly believe in that. And the size matter, I think right there you're onto something.
I don't know how it is in Texas, but in North Carolina we have these things that are called 5/1s or 6/1s, which is a 5 or 6 story building of condos or apartments. There's a parking deck in the middle where everybody goes to. The exteriors are kind of beige and gray, and they have these faux balconies that are maybe 15 inches wide. You can't even get a chair out on these balconies. And these things are going up everywhere like kudzu. Is that happening in Texas too?
I'd say it happens everywhere. Maybe a slight different thematic of postmodernism.
Yeah.
But I think it sort of arises with air conditioning anywhere. So that transitional space where maybe you enjoy the breeze, you're having shade right now, and you're in this perfect environment and just embracing the moment, that sort of thing is lost. You're either in and out. But we still give you the appearance of shutters and balconies.
Yeah.
Because that's the sort of people were looking at it. They try to have the roof back. with the rise of postmodernism, speak Venturi, and they basically felt like, wow, we really, that modernism at the end was too anonymous for most people, and I think that's sort of what led to the postmodernism.
Yeah.
And
modernism kind of got burned out for a while.
It did.
It had to go to rehab and reestablish itself.
Yeah, I say it's always here. It's still, in my mind, it's still young, especially the optimistic modernism, which I see with the K-Study House and the Eames in particular, compared to the Europeans who had to go all through the wars or escape the war and came over here. And sort of, more serious approach to that.
Much more serious.
And that optimism is sort of what I embraced. And also here, you can find it when you come and visit. So it's interesting to me.
One of the places you've spent a lot of time is Marfa, Texas. Donald Judd's little oasis of art and architecture. Most people have not been to Marfa, Texas, so tell us about it.
Well, Marfa, Texas, instead of throwing a big party for my graduation, I went there when I had my master's degree, I went to Marfa. That was 1996. So it wasn't known to many, but I think it becomes increasingly important because Donald Judd, you can really not classify what he did there. And this afternoon's talk, but also my approach is to show people what can be done with space and relatively few things if you think right about space. It's a very powerful experience because most buildings he touched, they were not done by famous architects.
Right.
But he recognized the proportions and the solidness of a good building. And I think that's sort of his secret ingredient to successful architecture.
Donald Judd created a series of buildings and installations there, which have really become a mecca for, I would say, more artists than architects over time.
You're right, it is more artists than architects. I'm a little bit nervous about the term mecca, that people sort of start worshipping something, but I think if you start looking at it, it can be an inspiration for using space in an innovative way. But yes, I'm glad about the influence and the recognition it gets because it's, in my word, the easiest way to say it is actually in German. It's called Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art. And that includes landscape architecture, the art itself, and the buildings. And that's sort of a Renaissance idea. And interestingly to know that he actually studied art history and he was a student of Wittkower and Meyer Shapiro in Columbia.
Oh, nice.
So that's some proportional background. But the easy thing for all of you listeners is he wasn't really interested in very complicated proportions or say the golden section had too many points behind the comma.
Right.
He said, make it simple. 5x6, 4x3, 1-to-1. Don't do any fractions. And if you start looking at it, it's a revelation how well things are, but it's not just reduced to modern things. It has sort of eclectic pieces in there of all kinds of time periods. And I think he's a student of history and archaeology, and I think that's what makes his work.
What year did he start working on that?
Well, basically all his life. If you look at his education, he started out as a painter, then actually studied philosophy, and then was short of actually having a master's degree in art history. But then also he went to the army, and he was building there as a former army buildings. So it's kind of nice that he sort of then has a former dilapidated fort to restore. So I would say the thinking is sort of universal.
But about what year was this?
He went to Marfa in 73. He purchased his first building, and in 71 he started renting. So before that, he purchased Spring Street, which is building cast iron, and saved it by Nicholas White for $68,000 in 1968.
Okay. It seems like he was part of a movement of these guys who would go somewhere remote. I know there was another one more famous recently that was in Arizona that's built this giant thing that's miles long. He moved all this earth to create it. I'm blanking on the name right now. But these were all started in the 70s where these artists were going to create something at such scale as to take them 30 years to complete.
Well, he really had a lot of ideas in terms of the landscape, but then also the work itself. I would actually consider Judd's work a little bit standing alone in this regard because his interior work, the work he uses inside, is actually very fragile, needs protection. And then he has these large 15 works in concrete, which are outdoors. And, that sort of sets him apart from the other land artists or that generation, that he basically dealt with the very tiny space, but also the large. And some projects, they're not even realized. One at the Rio Grande was actually considered to be a mile long, while the one then, the 15 concrete elements I just mentioned, they are a kilometer long. So for me now, I would say he's unique or stands unique in that group of artists because it included not just land art, it also included architecture, existing spaces. We would now say adaptive reuse, which is such a, you have to preserve that. He did that long before anybody did in America especially. And I think that's sort of not surprising in my mind that while his first exhibition in architecture was actually held in Europe. It was held in Münster, and then the book came out at the time and I sort of started to begin architecture, and it was bilingual. It was very influential to me because very direct language and actually looking at things not in a simple way, but in a complex way over many disciplines.
I'm trying to remember, was Donald Judd one of the first ones to bury cars in the desert?
I think you're with Ant and Chip Lord. That's the Cadillac Ranch. That's just a little tad north of Lubbock where I'm from.
Okay.
That's his project.
Okay.
But I would consider that art.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember, when that came out,
right,
that was just everywhere.
It was everywhere. It's a real landmark, yes.
Yeah. What is Marfa like today?
Very different. I would say it's transformed. It's now a town under 2,000 people. As many things, I would say to your listener, if you can, select some time to go, but go visit, because you can't print it. You have to experience in person. But it's very much that the modern amenities are there. The town is ready to accommodate large group of visitors, especially post-COVID, as we are now.
Yeah.
And then the other recommendation I make sure you make 2 appointments, one with the Judd Foundation and one with the Cinatti Foundation. In order to understand, you maybe can't see everything, but make sure you see one of each.
Okay. And they can do all that online, I suppose.
They can do that online, but still today I would consider you have to plan a little bit because you're actually far away from anywhere. So by the time you're there, there's really no commercial airline. You can either fly to El Paso or you fly to Midland, and then you have to do still about the 3-hour car trip.
So you've really got to want to get there.
Yes, and I think that maybe by your earlier term Mecca comes in it. But once you're there, I think you can actually see a landscape around Big Bend, Fort Davis, Alpine, Marfa, which I consider one of the most beautiful in the world. And I don't say that lightly. I've traveled quite a bit. It's a really special place.
Upe, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, George.
That was George talking with Upe Flueckiger. Journalist and communications consultant John Gendall grew up near the Canadian Rockies and in Colorado. After attending the Harvard Graduate School of Design, he served as an assistant editor at Architectural Record, and his writing has been published in the New York Times, Art Forum, and Architectural Digest. During the COVID lockdown, in his words, he unconsciously amassed an alternative collection of files on mesmerizing modernist estates in the Rocky Mountains, which became the book Rocky Mountain Modern, a publication that features 18 modernist projects dating from 2006 to 2021. Here's our conversation with John Gendall.
John, you grew up in Englewood, Colorado, right?
I spent part of my formative years in Colorado, yes.
And that's known for some modernist houses.
Fair enough, yeah.
Quite a neighborhood of them.
It's true. It's true.
What was it like growing up in Englewood?
Well, I was there for my years in high school and college, and it was mostly based on the outdoor experience. At that time of my life, architecture was a backdrop, and my father was in the industry, so it was of interest, but I wasn't, at that point in my life, paying attention to them as a critic or historian or journalist.
But at some point, you must have looked back and taken in this great childhood exposure you had.
What industry was your father in?
He was a builder. I was born and grew up in Alberta, Canada. He was a builder, so it took me to job sites as a kid. And
Up in Alberta,
yeah. So I spent a lot of time looking around job sites and construction sites. And so it was of interest, architecture and design and construction. And then later in life, I think when this book got going, I took a look back at landscapes that had been formative to me, and part of that was these modernist neighborhoods in and around Denver, and then, a few landmarks up in Canada as well.
And at what point in your adult life did you kind of see like architecture as a thing for you?
Well, I studied biology in college, actually, and did some years as a research lab technician, and then realized, I loved cities, I loved design and space and interior environments, and so it was in my early 20s I decided to take what was then a personal interest and make it more professional, and at that point went to the GSD at Harvard to study architectural history.
Okay, that's a big move to go to the GSD.
It was a big move from a small town in Canada to the GSD. And so there were a lot of change at that time. But in thinking about this book, my life at this age I'm at right now is pretty neatly divided. I spent the first half in and near the Rockies, and then the second half in the Northeast. So my time as a more serious, architectural practitioner has been centered in the Northeast. So, I came to know places like New Canaan, Connecticut, and Cape Cod, and Hamptons, places like those where I developed an interest in these regional pockets of modernism.
And your book is on the Rocky Mountains.
It is.
So what elements of the Rocky Mountains appeal to you to make that your book?
The landscape itself just speaks to me in incredible ways, just as a personal experience. I spend a lot of time skiing and hiking and out in those types of landscapes. So it was the backdrop of so many happy memories. But in looking at the history of modern architecture and the practice of contemporary modernist architecture in the Rockies, found a really rich practice of modernism in the Rockies dating from Mies van der Rohe's first commission in North America in Wyoming, and a very active practice of modernism in and around Aspen.
It seemed like a lot of the early famous architects, L.A. Noyes, for instance, would do a couple of houses. Mies van der Rohe would do one. They would have sort of this nominal house that some client would reach out and grab them to do in the Rockies. But who were the architects there that were really more prolific, that were doing dozens of houses throughout that region?
Well, less about the houses, but Herbert Bayer, of course, spent 30 years of his life and professional practice in Aspen, and he had an incredible imprint in the visual identity of Aspen, having done the graphic identity of Aspen with the logo they still use today. And in the architecture that he devised for the Aspen Institute campus, but then also his network of friends and collaborators that he would bring in. So yes, they were maybe one-off projects, but there was a network of professionals who were actively involved over a long duration through the International Design Conference and through the Aspen Institute, creating a kind of node of modernism in the mid-century.
So was your book more about, modernism as a collection of design themes, or were you looking more specifically at the architecture?
I was looking more specifically at the architecture. I was inspired by the fact that these houses are, of course, stunning visually and aesthetically, but the demands that the environment places on the design of the house are considerable. So, there's this marriage of stunning design work, but also the kind of necessities placed upon the house by the environment. High winds, heavy snowfall, much rain, not enough rain, wildfires, etc. So there's a whole range of really challenging environmental demands that are positioned in the design of these houses.
Tell us about one famous house I'm sure you're familiar with, the Sleeper House by Charles Deaton.
That is a house that I referenced earlier. My experience living in Colorado and going skiing often. It's a house I would see regularly from my car window. And you asked about my early interests a moment ago, and that would be one of them. These things that I just saw through the car window or passing by. That
we should probably mention that the Sleeper House, that's a reference to the Woody Allen movie from the 70s, Sleeper, in which the movie was filmed.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like a spaceship, doesn't it?
Exactly, still today.
Yeah, still today.
And you can see it from the highway, can't you?
Yeah, you can see it. So when I would go skiing, leaving Denver to up the I-70 corridor to Vail or wherever, it was always just sitting there on the side of the road. And
Have you written about the house?
Not specifically, no.
Okay.
Personal experience only.
Okay. Within the housing sector, who are some of the architects that were really working to provide, say, more affordable modern houses throughout the Rocky Mountain area?
Yeah, in doing research for the book and in spending time in these mountain communities, it was a theme that I heard a lot, where the question of affordable housing, workforce housing, even middle class housing at this point, how to do that in these mountain communities in a way that creates a more equitable experience for everyone. So there are architects now who are doing some interesting work with affordable and workforce middle-class housing. CCY Architects, for example, they have a project in the book, and they do these impressive houses on mountain peaks, etc. But they are also doing an affordable housing project in Telluride. They've worked on similar projects in Aspen. So there is a consideration, both for the houses that grace the cover of books like these, but also on the communities that are needed to make places vibrant and equitable.
Who were some of the architects that you highlighted in your book?
The book is mostly based on houses that were built within the last few years. So its focus is on contemporary practice. Approximately half of them are based in the Rocky Mountain regions. There are some firms like CCY, which I just referenced, or Studio B, René Del Gaudio, who have developed practices in the Rockies and have been there, for many years and have studied those vernacular forms and mid-century precedents. And then there are also firms like McLean Quinlan, for example, who is based in London. They have a project on the cover of the book, and Annabelle Seldorf, who's based in New York. Yeah, She has a project outside of Vail in the book. Barco Leibinger, based in Berlin. Frank Barco grew up in Montana and in college worked as a house framer in carpentry. And so his project in the book, which is outside of Bozeman, is in many ways like a study of construction practices and contemporary architecture.
So what do you see as the way to describe Rocky Mountain modern? What is different about it than, say, something in Connecticut?
Yeah, one thing that I came to realize is the relationship between inside and outside, which is often mentioned as a kind of central experience of modern environments. California modernism, it's certainly, part of that. Connecticut too. In the Rockies, while there is a careful consideration of the indoor-outdoor relationship, it's expressed differently, because the environment can be pretty rugged. Conditions can be inclement a lot of times. There's views and access to the outdoors, yes, but there's also an approach to enclosure that renders the house a place of refuge and safety. In a lot of cases, walls are thicker,
Right.
Views are carefully framed, but...
So that would be sort of the opposite of, say, what we have here in Palm Springs in Southern California, where everything is open.
Exactly.
Because in general, the weather is pretty clement. But there, it's more like, I guess, double pane windows.
I didn't know that was a word, Tom, that you could have clement weather as well as inclement weather.
Yeah, I also like the oranges. Yeah.
No, it's so true. I mean, here in Palm Springs, a fundamentally different expression of modernism.
Yeah.
And a triple planed glass in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But one of the architects who has two projects in the book, Olsen Kundig, Tom Kundig speaks of this relationship between prospect and refuge, where clients who build in places like these tend to want to have the experience of adventure, of being, in these remote locations. And so the house provides this sense of prospect where you can leave and go snowshoeing, you can ski and ski out in some cases. But then there's also a sense of refuge, where there is a sense of protectedness and safety.
Once you snowshoe your way back to the house, you're safe.
Exactly, yeah.
And warm.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people are affluent citizens from other places who are very busy in their work lives and want to be able to get away and just have privacy and leisure.
Yeah, it's so true. I think one of the other themes that I came across in pulling the projects together was that these clients, in many cases, the clients have long-standing relationships to that place, whether it's the town or the actual building site. So many of them, purchased property years and even decades ago and spent time with their families visiting the site, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, hiking, in some cases, overnight camping, and then eventually they decide to build. And in cases like those, what I would tend to hear was that the clients, yes, they wanted a house. Yes, they wanted to hire an architect to make it really special, but they didn't want it to distract from the landscape itself. So in a lot of cases, the outer expression of the house is kept pretty discreet in some cases. And so they work with the landscape to allow clients to come in from other places, live in and enjoy their house without creating a kind of visual distraction from the landscape they've come to really love.
So what would be an example of that? Describe how that would look.
Well, I mean, for example, Cutler Anderson designed a house. It's called the Rock House in the book. It's in Alberta, Canada. And it's fully enclosed by glass, but he tucked it back into a grove of trees and a rock outcropping such that the rocks and the trees form an enclosure, right? So it's a glass pavilion, and that way it draws from pretty explicitly the tradition of mid-century modernism, but it uses the rocks and the trees to create essentially a facade, a setting, yeah. And so in that way, I mean, you can walk around the house from maybe 270 degrees or something and not really see it.
Oh, wow.
And so it kind of asserts itself just very gently over the ledge. There's another project in Canada in Christina Lake in Boundary Country, and there, again, they tucked it into steeply sloping site, and the roof line follows the tree line such that you can look up from the lake and barely see the house.
So these are houses that kind of present themselves almost by surprise.
Exactly.
If you're in the right place.
Yeah, exactly.
What is your next project after the Rocky Mountains? Is there another region that you want to write about?
In one ways, I think the region will be a continued interest, and I've started to pull some material together for a project that looks more into the history of modernism in the Rocky Mountains. I addressed it in the introduction to this book and have turned up a lot of material and am working toward a book that addresses that as its point of focus.
Because this book is primarily relatively new construction. Are you looking to focus on existing houses in the next book?
Well, the houses in this book are existing.
Yeah, okay.
But they were
Older
built.
houses.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about Mies and Breuer and Noyes and all of these titans of modernism who had so much to do with theory and practice of modernism. I think is very compelling to see them at work in the Rockies, negotiating this relationship between rugged environments and modernism.
So I'm guessing the Sleeper House will be in that book.
Correct. Yeah.
Excellent. We cannot wait for that.
Okay.
You got to go check that out.
I'll keep you posted. Yeah.
John's website is johngendall.com.
Correct.
JohnGendall. Thanks for joining us, John.
Thank you very much.
George and I were talking with author John Gendall.
Returning guest Laura Windley is a jazz, swing, and big band vocalist and swing DJ based in Durham, North Carolina. She's a founding member with her husband Lucien Cobb of the Mint Julep Jazz Band, focusing on the music of the 20s through the 40s. And they have a great new album, Watch the Birdie. Laura has performed all over the country, from Austin to New York to Pasadena, where the band recently performed at the Lindy Groove Cowbell with Keenan McKenzie and the Riffers. Welcome back, Laura.
Oh, thank you for having me again. It's lovely to be back.
We didn't talk last time when you were here, but you're originally from Beaufort, North Carolina.
That is correct.
What's the jazz scene like down there?
In terms of live jazz, probably non-existent, but I was heavily influenced by my grandfather, who collected jazz records. And so all of my jazz exposure was through him, either through records or there was probably like an AM radio station he tuned into that, would play big band music.
Do you ever get to Oriental, which is not too far away?
I don't get to Oriental.
Oh,
Sorry.
There's an actual music scene there. I know one of the guys that used to work here at the studio has a string band there. But, yeah, it's more fiddle and banjo and stuff like that.
Okay. But I have performed in Beaufort as a jazz musician. Beaufort has a music festival. And before I started the Mint Julep Jazz Band, I was singing in a band called the Atomic Rhythm All-Stars, and we performed.
I've heard of them. Yeah, sure.
We performed at the Beaufort Music Festival. And it was great, just like walk from Granny's house to the stage.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Small town performing.
Exactly.
Your band released an album called Watch the Birdie. Tell us about the music and also about the amazing cover art.
Okay, well, let's start with the cover art because it is wonderful. So the artist is Darius Quarles, who lives in Durham, and I think most people would know his work from various murals around town. One that I particularly love is the what remains of the Liberty Warehouse, which was turned into condos. But there's a wall, like one of the exterior walls is left. And on the inside of that, he's painted essentially a tribute to the tobacco industry in Durham. And his style is unique in that it looks very modern. And also, to me, it looks like stained glass. And I think that the combination of those things just really spoke to me. And I was happy that he agreed to do our cover art and sort of went with my vague sketch of a concept and made something truly lovely.
It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. The title track is from a 1941 film called Hell's a Poppin'. And in the film, Martha Raye sings the song. I don't know if I always associate Martha Raye with the Polydent commercials from the 1980s, but she had this whole career, and she's an incredible comedian and was just adorable. And so I sort of put myself in the Martha Raye role with a dress that was similar to hers. I fixed my hair, and then I have a vintage camera that I'm holding in the cover art. And so that was also really fun to sort of recreate.
Because the photographers would say, "Watch the birdie." They took the picture.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so the whole song, the title track from the film is Martha Raye. She's essentially, to set up the scene, a photographer's taking a photograph of these pretty girls, and she sort of jumps in, and he's like, no, get out of the way. And she's like, well, fine. And then she steals his camera and goes and starts taking pictures of attractive men. And so, and then sings this song as she's going along taking the photographs.
Hell is a poppin'. This song from the new album is called Besame Mucho, which I only learned recently means kiss me a lot. Mm-hmm. Written and performed first in 1940 by Consuelo Velasquez, it became a hit in 1943 in the U.S. with the Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra. According to Velasquez herself, she wrote this song even though she had never been kissed. And kissing, as she had heard, I guess from the Catholic Church, was considered a sin.
Unless it's the Pope's ring.
Oh,
Right.
no.
The song was recognized in 1999 as the most recorded and covered song in Spanish of all time. In 1990, a clandestine affair between two Brazilian government ministers was revealed to public knowledge as the couple danced cheek to Besame Mucho during a birthday party, and one of them was forced to resign as a result. A few days later, at a military awards ceremony, the band struck up Besame Mucho as she was presented with her Medal of Honor. The band's musical director got 3 days suspension.
Scandal.
The song has since been covered by Frank Sinatra, Diana Krall, and even the Beatles. Here's Laura and the band with Besame Mucho.
Besame mucho.
Mucho, mucho, mucho.
Each time I cling to your kiss, I hear music divine. Besame, besame mucho.
Mucho, mucho, mucho.
Hold me, my darling, and say that you'll always be mine. Besame, besame mucho.
Mucho, mucho, mucho.
Como si fuera esta noche la última vez. Bésame, bésame mucho.
Mucho, mucho, mucho.
Porque tengo miedo tenerte y perderte después. This joy is something new, my arms enfolding. You never knew this thrill before. Whoever thought I'd be holding you close to me, whispering it's you I adore. Dearest one, if you should leave me,
Mucho, mucho.
each little dream would take wings and my life would be through. Bésame, bésame mucho.
Mucho, mucho, mucho.
Love me forever and make all my dreams come true. Unfolding, you never knew this thrill before. Whoever thought I'd be holding you close to me, whispering it's you I adore. Dearest one, if you should leave me,
Mucho, mucho.
each little dream would take wings and my life would be through. Bésame, bésame mucho.
Mucho, mucho, mucho.
Love me forever and make all my dreams come true.
Sounds like you got some great backup singers going mucho, mucho, mucho.
Right. Who are those?
Who are those guys?
Are they the Julepettes?
It's the guys in the band.
Uh-huh.
Yes, and they did a very robust job of chiming in there.
Yeah.
Now, Laura, you are involved with an organization that sounds pretty cool called the Empower Circle in Durham. What's that all about?
Yes. So I'm actually just brand new member of the board of the Empower Foundation. And so I hope I can do it justice. It is an organization, it's a nonprofit organization that strives to bring dance opportunities to underserved children in underserved communities in and around Durham. And there are many ways that they can do that. Some of it is through dance scholarships to the Empower Dance Studio that's also in Durham. And they also do community outreach, like going into communities and having sort of like workshops or one-off dance classes at community centers or even just, at a park.
Weren't there some really fabulous clubs in the Black community in the 30s and 40s in Durham? I've always heard legend of that, but I don't know where they were.
Well, I would say, I guess the most talked about, or at least that I've noticed in news clippings from that time, would be the Durham Armory, which opened in 1938. And depending on who the promoter was, they would have either a white show or essentially a black show. And there were multiple black promoters having shows at the Durham Armory at that time. And what's really interesting about that is that whoever was promoting it sort of got the bottom floor of the venue, and then whoever was not was in the balcony. And so it's one of the few instances that I've heard of white people being in the balcony and black people being on the floor. I mean, you name it, like Lionel Hampton, Ella Fitzgerald, Cootie Williams, the Ink Spots, just like anybody who was anybody came there and performed. And then prior to the Durham Armory, they would have shows in tobacco warehouses. So, for example, I like to say Duke Ellington performed where there is now a Mr. Tire in downtown Durham where I get my oil changed.
Is there a plaque somewhere on the wall?
I wish there was a plaque. So he performed twice in the 30s in Durham prior to the armory being built. Mr. Tire, and then basically the parking lot that's behind Mr. Tire was the other tobacco warehouse. And all of these shows, both at the armory and at the tobacco warehouses, drew tons of people and then even escalated during, let's say, World War II because of Camp Butner. And so you had a military base essentially there, and people were looking for entertainment. And so it just kind of exploded in the 1940s, which seems counterintuitive that there would be more touring and more shows to attend. But, Durham was essentially a hub of entertainment. There's another theater in Durham, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name of it. But I know Count Basie performed there because there I saw ads for it. So there were multiple places in Durham that you could see live music in the 1930s and 40s.
Well, maybe Empower can get Mr. Tire to open up at night, have a special commemorative concert dance performance.
I don't know how they would feel about that.
Ella Mae Morse was hired by Jimmy Dorsey when she was 14, and at 17, she joined Freddie Slack's band. She originated this next song, the World War II hit Milkman, Keep Those Bottles Quiet, which was later popularized by Nancy Walker, mother of Rhoda in the Mary Tyler Moore series, and in the 1944 film Broadway Rhythm. Ella Mae Morse stopped recording in 1957, but she continued performing into the early 90s at such clubs as Michael's Pub in New York. She also appeared regularly at Disneyland for several years with the Ray McKinley Orchestra and did a successful tour in Australia before her final illness. Here's Laura with Milkman, Keep Those Bottles Quiet.
Milkman, keep those bottles quiet. Can't use that jive on my milk diet. So milkman, keep those bottles quiet. Been jumping on a swing shift all night, turning out my quota. All right, now I'm deep right down to the side. Gotta catch the noise of the riveter. I don't mind it 'cause a man with the whiskers has a lot behind him. But I can't keep punching with the victory crew when you're making me punchy with that bottle move. I wanna give my all if I'm gonna give it, but I gotta give my shot if I'm gonna rev it. Don't bail out, bud, with that milk barrage. It's unpatriotic, it's a sabotage.
I guess, Laura, we should tell our audience what a milkman is, because, that really is an archaic term now. So, folks, if you lived in the 20th century, your milk would be delivered by a man in a refrigerated truck.
With bottles.
With bottles that would be made of glass and would clink. This was way before grocery stores dominated the whole milk scene. You could get cottage cheese and butter and eggs and all kinds of things like that. And everybody had a milkman that would come to their door. It was a different time.
Yes, it was.
Laura, where can people find your new album and keep up with your tour schedule?
Well, they can find our new album essentially anywhere that there's digital music. If you're looking to purchase the album, I would recommend purchasing it from Bandcamp, which gives artists more money than other distributors. And then to keep up with what we're doing with the Mint Julep Jazz Band, you can go to mintjulepjazzband.com. And if you're interested in hearing me sing with Mint Julep and also with other people, you can go to laurawindley.com. And Windley is the spelling of the last name, because that seems to trip a few people up. And then hopefully we'll be doing a vinyl release. We've just approved the test pressings that we got. And so in a few months, we will have vinyl records for sale, and you can purchase those through Bandcamp.
Laura, thanks so much for coming back and joining us.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. A delight, as always.
Thanks for listening. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in February 2024 and hang out at the U.S. Modernist compound? Email me, george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Visit U.S. Modernist massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 15,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.1 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Kelly Policelli researched all the guests for our Modernism Week interviews, 42 of them this year. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back in 2 weeks with more great guests from Modernism Week in Palm Springs.